A man stood one day on the outskirts of the city, near the area where people involved in that certain kind of activity congregated. And as he looked their way, said, as best I can make out from their descriptions, mystics seem to me to be simple men trying to make more out of life than there is. And one so involved happened to overhear this and remarked, not bad. There was once a planet on which one race of creatures populated the surface and another the underground. And for some reason, perhaps that they were the most visible, the ones on the surface had the reputation of being in charge. Yeah. Though a better understanding of their history now suggests otherwise. The teacher called out to the children on the playground, who all wants to work on their body? And many raised their hands and squealed out their positive vote therefore. Then she called, who all wants to work on their feelings? And a few less expressed their interest therein. Then she proclaimed, who all wants to work on their mind? And this time one kid turned to another and said, where do you think this is leading? No. And his friend was reflectively quiet for a bit and finally responded, well, I guess one clue should be the fact that she seems to be in charge and we appear to be in the position of subservience. But the first lad here interrupted and said, but wait, doesn't the fact that we're on a playground tell you something? Yeah. And again, the other child was silent for a moment, then said, no. Out of the asses of babes come the mouth stuffs of their elders. Which is how it's supposed to be, which is the orderly evolution of collective man, and which is not viewed by the many as anything related to recess and playtime. Excitement update. Only death can calm down children and other actively evolving creatures, such as the mystically inclined. There is a fable which tells of a time when moles and eagles were in partnership. The tale, in fact, goes on to say that the fable itself is misleading in that what really had once been was that moles and eagles were the same creature. A regrettable omission in the story is the reason why it was presented in such a misleading fashion. After some years of trying to objectively study such matters, one man asked himself, which is the more foolish, being totally and blindly civilized, or being a critic of civilization? This is not only an interesting subject to ponder, but one which ordinary minds are never allowed to conclusively answer, since doing so would weaken the very foundations of civilizations and framework of man's regulation evolution. Although the origins of many hoary proverbs are difficult to pinpoint, the source of one particular one is beyond doubt. Life itself is responsible for that piece of axiomatic wisdom that is now a secure part of man's collective thinking, which says that little things mean a lot. Got to give it credit. Not only does life provide man with a gigantic illusionary machine, but also furnishes him with imaginary lubricants to help keep the thing apparently running. Pop quiz. How can you tell that someone is a secret salesman, and dupe I might add, for life? They'll gladly tell you how life, or the gods, want man to live. I'm telling you, you got to be circumspect. Life has got plants, spies, and filth columnists everywhere. There was once a planet on which words came to have their own bodies, with little hands and little feet, and could get around and mingle with the creatures who spoke them, much like the creatures did amongst themselves. Well, this went on for a number of years until some of the creatures who spoke began to believe that their evolution had slowed from previous times. Yeah. And concluded that the cause was in words having developed their own separate physiques and identities. So, there appeared to be only one thing to do, which should be so obvious as to not require me having to tell you what it was. And as always, dear Astro Armchair Nauts, aren't you glad to be here on your own home planet where you, by God and by golly, belong and know what to expect? Those who live in the city and who have slight interest in matters non-urban are prone to looking off to those unregulated areas just outside of town and imagining that they see gods and ghosts and all other sorts of aberrations. A useful, practical tip for any of you who still believe that there is anything useful in practical tips is that it's probably safest not to look toward a place if you're not planning to go there. And a further curious note along this line is the fact that you cannot predict from moment to moment how the mind will react to this idea. Sometimes agreeably, other times not. But hey, whoever said that life in the city is anything but interesting? Well, except for those who've ever been away from it for any length of time. The experiencing of that special state of consciousness is non-causal in that there is nothing you can do that specifically guarantees that you will achieve it. The whole process itself, same as life, is non-linear and more like a case of you're here in the middle of everything and it's also in here somewhere, and that's about all you can say. Medical follow-up to an earlier story. It was previously noted this evening that only death can calm down children and other actively evolving beings such as the mystically inclined. But there is an inner refinement to this fact that should be taken into account, which is that distraction can also kill a man's transcendental enthusiasm just on a more gradual scale than death itself. Yeah. And now on to something a bit less serious, some mountain climbing news. A man once asked a mystic, if the body itself cannot awaken a man, can it still be used as an alarm clock? And the mystic, as he pushed the man off the cliff, replied, how could it not be? What else the hell are you going to use? And as the man plummeted downwards, he shouted back, well, I guess you could use the mind as the reminder. And the by now totally exasperated mystic shouted back to the man, you guess, geez, what a waste of perfectly good high altitude. And just before he hit bottom, the man thought to himself, perhaps I got too distracted somewhere in the conversation. A legend holds that once, long ago, so long ago, or for some other reason, that it is now forgotten, save by a curious few, that this planet was used as a playing field for a certain cosmic game, which was so rough and hard fought that large streams of blood were left behind from the participants, and which, although still extant, are not seen as such, and in fact are referred to and thought of as something else entirely. There was once a man who believed that he talked to himself, but in a particular fashion beyond the accepted version thereof. He believed that he talked to himself with two separate voices, one that was verbal and in his head, and the other that was nonverbal and somewhere below. Some time spent with a consistent awareness of this dramatically altered his perception of what talking to yourself consisted of, and in fact, ultimately altered what his talking to himself did consist of. Update of above story. In a future life, this same man reached a whole new level of understanding, wherein every time he would begin to talk to himself, he would immediately interrupt in demand, "Hey, who you talking to?" which never failed to give him, his thoughts, and life a darn good laugh. Be sure and tune in next time as we continue to track and update this update and take on the additional question of, other than the problem of rust, why cannot water be used in place of brake fluid? And individual understanding in lieu of thinking about things. So, until next time, talk about it among yourself. There was once a land in which existed a most wondrous transportation system which connected all parts of the kingdom, and which any inhabitant could ride free. In fact, not only could they ride free, they were required to. And inexplicable of inexplicables, a few eventually rebelled at the situation. One day, one man strolling in that little area between where the city stops and the less structured lives of the less urbanized beings take place, looked over their way and mused to himself, "What I ascertain from what I hear about such people makes me believe that all a mystic is someone who refuses to go where everyone else goes. Big deal." And just at that moment, an unusually constructed eagle flew by and dropped a hole in the ground directly on the man's unprotected head. There was once a developed area in which any time the word paradoxical would come up, all the good citizens would quickly gather around the area where it arose and collectively commence to beat it thoroughly back down. Often accompanying their efforts with a chant, "Ain't no city of mine gonna talk to me like that." There was once a world on which, when road crews would prepare to lay down new train tracks, the sun would rise soon in the morning to lead them all in an appropriate work song, without which the tracks would not remain equidistance apart, nor lead anywhere. Development in all parts of a universe such as this one depends on the continual and timely appearance of paradox, or in a type, the temporary substitute of irony. Do note that all of this is a phenomenon completely unknown to the bodies of the indigenous beings therein, and is also why the less evolved amongst them have their greatest faith in things physical. Cities depend on this for survival. Some pharmaceutical news for farmers and other people who work out of doors. Men enjoy drugs for the same reason they do intense emotions. They both tend to make the time pass more quickly, or slowly, as your case may be. In an attempt to raise new revenue, if not his own standing and image, one king asked his council how they might go about taxing the neurotransmitter production of the people's brains, and was told that their minds were already being taxed to the max, and besides that he and they were far too close and similar for one of them to be distinguishable enough from the other to be able to extract any additional tribute. And upon receiving this advice, His Grace thanked them all for taking the time to join him there in his thoracic cavity, since they expected him to say, "They're in his head," and since subordinates should be kept off balance and never too sure of themselves. Psychology believes that behavior is the source of happiness, and religion believes behavior to be the key to salvation, while mystics see behavior as something your body does as you try and awaken the mind. On a recently non-unearthed vase is written a legend which says that every known myth, legend, allegory, and epic are all the handiwork of one man, and that furthermore he is presently inside that vase and will not come out as long as people continue to call it a vase instead of a vase. The leader of a mighty fighting force one day summoned all the troops together and informed them that henceforth no one was to fall in for inspection while still armed with any words. Physical armies rise and fall, while mental ones just continue to, well, not rise so much. Oh, they fall real good, but the problem's in the rising. And life continues outside their comprehension to count cadence for the dupes. Hup, 2, 2, 2, hup, 2, 2, 2. And on they stroll. One city passed an ordinance that required that the volume of speech be loudest for those citizens who understood the least. But then the mayor and the chief of police got into a fist fight over who would be in charge of making the determination. But this being the city and all, the dispute made no difference in the outcome, and did in fact assist in there being an outcome. Life in the city. After having written a real nice and unexpected letter to a certain genie, the vaporous one reacted to the kindness by writing the man back and offering him a free wish. And 10 or 9 days later, the genie got a response from the man, wherein he indicated that he'd like to be able to speak directly, that he would like to be able to speak to his organs directly. And the genie had to write him back again and ask specifically which one, for he said he couldn't arrange a blanket conversation with all his organs, and that the man would have to choose one, such as his stomach, or maybe his heart, or even his brain. Well, this time a good fortnight passed before the man replied, and this time the communique was not quite so friendly and respectful. According to yet one more unaccounted history of this solar system, the reason that the gods quit granting men favors and picking on them individually was because no matter which of the two they did, it didn't have any lasting effect. Not as long as they mentally kept marching to that same old hup, 2, 2, 2, hup, 2, 2, 2. There was once an old man who believed that matters of health were a spurious illusion, and that everyone was either born healthy or not, and that there wasn't a damn thing you could do about changing it. The reason you've ever heard stories of him and his idea is because he never died sufficiently for them to ever take hold. There was once a ladder propped up on the side of a building, and after a while the building asked the ladder what it was doing there and just what it had in mind. Yeah. Questions, questions, mused the ladder. No matter where you go, it's questions. It's enough to make you sick. Yeah. A man given to metaphorical intrigue asked a mystic, in the symbolism of a mystical train running from Paris to Istanbul, with Paris representing man's natural born state and Istanbul a more advanced one, can you in 8 words literally explain this to me? And the mystic replied, okay, Paris is your stomach and Istanbul your consciousness. And the man took this in and appeared to mull it in a manner appropriate to the situation. Then said to the mystic, were you counting the word okay in your response? In one solar system, in a hole where a planet once existed, there appeared an orbiting moral which proclaimed to all the local inhabitants that it is safer to talk to some people than to others. What is it that you think caused the disappearance of the planet? One unreported myth tells of an ancient magician who had the ability to both hold and pass along lightning, but that he seldom engaged in the latter. Note, there's got to be a damn good reason that so many of these old stories have fallen into the let's forget about it abyss. There was once a world on which periodically appeared not mystics or religious prophets, but men who could untangle rolls of twine. There was once a man in which appeared himself. In another galaxy was once a planet on which everyone was born alive, and the only differences between them was whatever each person said there was. There was once a man who never said anything inside himself, who never said inside of himself what difference there might be between him and anyone else. In a faraway, magical kingdom once lived two groups of people, one up on a mountaintop, the other in a valley below, and one day one of the groups heard about this story and thought, this sure does sound familiar. Haven't we heard very similar tales just in different verbal guises? And upon hearing them say this, the man telling the tale became quite upset and indignant. This was taken from the Grimace Brothers' Blue Book of Fooey Tales. A man asked a mystic, since your sort have always claimed that you're involved with trying to become more conscious or conscious in some non-standard fashion, I've got a question for you. If your activities are based on some real possibility, then why does not life make everyone so interested and involved? And as frequently occurs, the mystic was pleasantly struck by the non-significance of the fact that life will permit ordinary people to form such questions and make such observations so close to the truth of things and yet never leading them on to any life-shaking discoveries. In fact, yet another version of history in this regard says that the whole idea of there being a secret knowledge evolved from the experiences of the first men who stumbled onto the fact that their consciousness could at times be of such a different quality and scope as to make their everyday natural one unacceptable by comparison, but who found everyday ordinary people totally uninterested in their discovery when they tried to tell them about it. So they early on adopted a silent attitude, sort of like, well, fuck them. And no more did they attempt to speak to others about it. Yet memory that they once had lingered in the collective mind of man, and it was a short, easy step from there to their beginning to refer to what they no longer were being told about as being some kind of secret knowledge. A certain alert man one day confronted his thoughts and demanded, are you keeping something secret from me? And in this momentary, more reflective state, he imagined that his thoughts replied, if you were truly as sharp as you believe you are, you wouldn't have taken so long to ask me this. Yeah. The mystical, in fact, do not have to look to other mystics, or to mystical systems, or mystical histories, or mystical teachings for an answer to any question regarding where the secret resides. There is no place to look other than the one place where it is. That difficult, subtle, quick, tricky, and so damn near as to seem inaccessible place. Religious update, if it's of any help. Men who pray to God are those men who don't see where He is. And for those of greater perception, you can substitute for God the words life or mind. There was once a world on which it was forbidden to tell tales about how things were on some other world. If you wanted to say something about how things were there, you had to go ahead and say that it was about there and not some fictitious other world. Yeah. And as you can probably imagine, a lot of folks wanted to get the hell away from there, which is partly how the universe keeps expanding. Surprise. There was once a mysterious order who taught that the reason men had such difficulty seeing what life was truly about was due to them having lost in the time long past one of their eyes. You know, this story could have been of some interest if it made any sense at all. One man told his son, look, let's save ourselves some future time and energy and go ahead now and settle a certain matter. A suggestion which the lad had no reason to resist, so on the pater pushed. Okay then, listen up to me. From one quite valid and operational view, the only difference between a man who has struggled his whole life to achieve that expanded special state of individual consciousness and every other normal, sane person is that, and suddenly the phone rang and the old man said, well, we'll have to continue this some other time, I guess. Which may come as more of a surprise to you than it did the kid, since his father had pulled this same gag on him several times before, and which revealed to him each time something new. That's the benefit in life, providing you with a mind of a progenitor worthy of a descendant superior to itself. As the proverb inscribed on the space furniture reminds, let he who has ears pull them off and eat them while there is still time. Going to take the unprecedented, wimpy step of referring to last program and even attempting a drive-by wrap-up of the subject on which someone resembling myself's lips were moving. It started off with a general description that I was going to speak about government and politics as an example of the collective mind of man. And the point was a general example that I just plucked out would be such as it is now here in 1998 or wherever it is. Here it is in Belgium. By all accounts, by all political accounts, by all reports, writings, the wisdom of our economists, public commentators, after there being the last 3 quarters of a downward trend in the gross national product, it has been traced to uncertainty in consumer spending, which then further has been traced to the public's concern over the instability of the prime rate. Now, we have all heard this over and over. The Prime Minister's spoken about it. The Minister of the Exchequer, the head of our banking system. It is now the simple fact. And for those of you just tuning in, this has nothing to do with politics, Belgium, money, government. This is now an accepted fact. And I will try one more time. There are no specific words for this, but I'm going to give it the same sort of shot I did last time, and then give one verbal ephemeral wrap-up and press on, as we say in the bespoke stage. It is a part and parcel, without any doubt, no criticism, no sarcasm intended. It is a part now of the contemporary wisdom of sophisticated, up-to-date, concerned, intelligent, Flemish and French-based citizens here in Belgium. That, what I just said, if I got to go back and do it again, is a fact. That the lack of economic growth, particularly in the consumer market of the Belgian economy, has been a downward trend for the last 3 quarters, and it is directly traceable. Without any doubt, it is now an accepted fact that it is traceable to the public's uncertainty as to the prime rate. Assuming that everyone has any idea what all that means. When did this start? How did this knowledge come about? Now I can continue talking and try to make up examples like I did last time, that the oldest record they could find was that 3 weeks ago, someone at a press conference in the government, or a reporter, somebody, an economist at a university, that somebody came up with that idea. That somebody looked down at the government's figures and they had nothing else to do, let's say, and some reporter looked down, and it looked like, as best he could make out with numbers and charts, that the level of consumer spending had decreased over the last 3 quarters. And so he has to earn his money, and it's kind of quiet there in the interview, and so he says, well, Mr. Prime Minister or Mr. Secretary of the Treasury, how do you account for this decrease here? It looks like the consumer spending is going down. What do you have to say? And so perhaps the Prime Minister, or whoever it was, said it. You understand? They could have traced it somewhere. But here is the point. You've either got to see it or not, and then we're going to move on. Consumer, go back and sort of extract and quoting what I said, is this piece now of prevailing, important information. It's a piece of reality here in Belgium, circa 1999, concerning the economy. This is an accepted fact from the highest echelons of the financial arm of the government down to the educated man in the street, so to speak. They did a poll today, the leading paper here in Brussels, and asking what do you consider to be the most pressing problem facing us good Belgians. And the majority responded, or the majority response was the concern that the public seems to have, which is adversely affecting consumer spending. Their uncertainty as to the stabilization of the prime interest rate. People answer that. That was the answer that was received the most. So it's gone all the way from from an official declaration, a statement, it is now down to the public. I'm asking you, you've got to see it, because this is not an attack on prime ministers or governments or the stupidity of people. It is now an accepted reality, but when? Now forget even my example, I just gave you something to go with. Forget the press conference where somebody finally, or when somebody apparently first said, well, I believe that the decrease in consumer spending is directly traceable to the public's uncertainty as to the stability of the prime interest rate. Now even if we went back and we can't find those exact words before 3 weeks ago when the Prime Minister or whoever it was said that, forget that. That's still not the point. Or if you want to use that, all right, let's take that. But when did the Secretary of the Exchequer or the Prime Minister, who it was, where was he? What time of day was it? Where was he? In the palace or at home somewhere? When was it that he looked around? And there it was. There was the public's uncertainty regarding the stability of the prime interest rate. When did he see this? I mean, was it hiding? Was it in an alley? Did somebody, maybe he's got paid informants. Maybe there's somebody that's applying to someone in training, a sycophant in training, came to me and says, hey, I found this thing that you might could use, and he opens up this box, and there's the public's uncertainty as to the stability of the prime interest rate. When did he look? Where did he look? In what fashion did he see this? And I just cut part of it. It's even more complex than that. It also accounts for the decrease in consumer spending over the last 3 quarters. Let me put it to you another way, if you can see it. It is, in one sense, this is all based on illusion, which is, as I said, none of this fits what a more conscious perception of it would reveal, that none of my verbal descriptions cover it adequately. Because it's not actually illusionary in the sense that somebody looks around and their eyes are playing tricks on them. Because we know, you know, I didn't insinuate that the Minister of the Exchequer was at home, and because he needs glasses or he's got the beginning of a minor tumor, a mini stroke, that he suddenly looked around, lurking behind the toilet over there as he was shaving. I don't mean that he looked around and believed that he saw the public's uncertainty as to the stability of the... I don't mean illusionary in that sense. But the thing is, I do mean in the sense there was no physical occurrence. The thing I'm describing, the public's uncertainty as to the stability of the prime interest rate, that is not something that someone, anyone, ever observed. That was not something that happened in front of them like, my God, I saw a car wreck. Or look at that, a man just jumped off of a building. Or look at that. There's nowhere that anybody looked and that happened. It just suddenly was part of the Belgium reality. Now, I mean, to such a point, you've got to, some of you understand that I am in no wise poking fun at this and going, ha ha. It is now such a part of reality. It's why you cannot truly call it illusionary. Not in the sense it's normally taken. It is now after it's been said, after a few weeks, a few days, whatever time it takes for it to permeate local thinking, that it is now part of man's collective mind here at this level that I'm referring to in Belgium. Not only that, it is now affecting subsequent thinking, apparently subsequent events. There are now people who have changed their manufacturers, retailers, bankers, who say that they have now changed their plans. They have altered their operations to fit into what is now known, what is now realized to be the public's grave questions and uncertainties as to the stability of the prime interest rate. And therefore they have had to make changes in their projected output. Here at such and such plant, or a banker said, I have had to change my own rates. We were projecting, as always, 6 months ahead. As far as the rate for consumer credit, we have had to, here, in a totally unexpected and a manner unusual for the way in which we normally operate here at the bank, we have had to change it here in mid-year. We had to change it almost immediately to fit into this reality, this just realized discovery. So this thing that in a sense never happened, there was never an occurrence that that anyone looked around and went, my God, now I see it. Look at there. There is the public's decreasing faith in the consumer in the retail market. There's why they're not buying as they did 3 quarters ago. And there it is. I mean, there it is. Look. It is their uncertainty as to the stability of the prime interest rate. What? My God, how could I have been so blind? No such thing occurred. Nothing even close occurred. You know it didn't. There is no such thing as that. And yet now that thing is such a part of the local reality that it is affecting other quite real things, such as a manufacturer has now, in mid-schedule, let's say it was an automobile manufacturer, but something on a seasonal basis, they had already projected and set in motion the assembly plants of how many of automobiles they're going to try out this year, but they have had to, in mid-year, in the production of this year's model, they have had to, as they put it, they had to. I mean, what else could we do? As a reasonable businessmen, we had to change our predictions. We had to change our setup, our schedule of production. We had to, after realizing that, this was going on. The news item last time, if you recall, that I put in, that I read earlier in the evening to relate to this, said that in the oceans, gulfs, seas, and fjords, dye placed in one locale will eventually color the waters elsewhere. Something, and I'm not going any further with this now, something that becomes a part of some given area. As things are now, it's never really in any area any larger than local, not in any way that's worthwhile to discuss. It always seems to be local, to a country, to some segment of a country. But when something becomes part of a locale, a local area's thinking, when it becomes a part of its thinking in one area, enough that it's going to have legs, that it's going to survive for some length of time, and I'm not prepared to predict, it doesn't matter. Some things people say and they're forgotten immediately. But once it becomes part of collective conventional wisdom for some length of time, enough that it's reported on, enough that it's talked about, enough that other people, other than the person who said it or the people who've been saying it, that now other people are altering their behavior and their thinking based upon this, it is now part of collective conventional wisdom. When it happens in one area, even remember that we started off, that you're seeing that it didn't actually happen. There is no experiential, observable, demonstrative basis for this fact. But this fact is now part of their collective conventional wisdom, and once it permeates, once the dye is dropped in there, if it's going to survive, if it doesn't just dissipate and forgotten as soon as it's said, if it's dropped in one area, it will eventually color other areas. Inexplicably, people who have, not only the people who are mouthing it as experts and people apparently close to the problem itself, not only do they have no understanding of it, which must be true since we already pointed out that there was no comprehensive source of it. There was no De Soto, Magellan, Balboa, who stepped over the beautiful hills of Los Angeles, and instead of discovering the Pacific Ocean, discovered the consuming public's uncertainty as to the stability of the prime interest rate. There was no such discovery, and so therefore every commentary afterwards, every observation, every criticism, everything added thereto is simply, it's like farts pleased to be in a windstorm. Or after the first two stages, when it gets down to the conventional, collective conventional wisdom of everyone else, or most people, do you understand? Do you see that the other people, the people on the street now responding to polls about it and repeating it? I'm struck again that there is absolutely no way to describe this. They are talking in a manner that a reporter asked them, a pollster said, what would you consider to be the most pressing problem that we face here in Belgium today? And a man on the street, just an ordinary fellow, not an expert, not an economist, and he says, it would seem to me that it's that problem that everybody's talking about is that we're, all of us out here in the public, just us normal people, is we're so concerned we don't really know what to do. It's the uncertainty as to the stability of the prime interest rate. And the reporter thinks, well, good, and he writes that down. Do you understand? I'm just going to put it to you just directly. The man who said that, in one sense, as far as any comprehension being involved, he may as well have been speaking Martian, Norwegian, Icelandic, Icelander, gibberish. And yet he said it exactly right. He looked dead in the camera if they were taking his photograph or doing it on video. He looked right in the camera. He did pregnant pauses. He did a little, and it was obvious he hadn't thought about it before. He wasn't planning this. They just stopped him suddenly and he goes, huh. You go, well? And he looks as sincere as your grandmother's shawl. And he says it. It's intelligent, and if you were reasonably intelligent and you'd been keeping up with the news off and on, you're not surprised to hear it. You might be a little surprised. You could even be pleasantly surprised that the man in the street is beginning now to take more notice of important matters such as the prime interest rate. The man may as well have been speaking gibberish. But it doesn't matter. Then the question is, how did it get in his mouth? It's not in his brain. It's not in his individual consciousness. True. It's in the collective mind of man in that one area. And once it gets in there, until it is spent, until life is through with it for the time being, it will permeate into people. Of course, I'm overdoing when I say it will permeate like down the line to the man in the street. You realize it had no basis for permeance to start with. And yet there it is. There it is. That is probably the most pressing problem facing Belgium today is the public. The consuming public's uncertainty as to the stability of the prime interest rate. That might as well have been gibberish, except it seems to make sense. So it's just dropped in the waters of Belgium. And for some reason it doesn't dissipate. It doesn't disappear. Life needs that. And so amidst civilized minds, it might as well be this underground network. The information, I call it information. The words, the sounds put in either Flemish or French, according to which area you're from in Belgium, has spread out to the point that ordinary, sane, educated citizens in the street now repeat the same gibberish. How? It is because it is not individual minds speaking. It is the collective mind of man in one area speaking. And the one area is of no importance. It is all that is normally heard on this planet is sounds from the collective mind of man, which is a salesman, a shill, an unwitting dupe for you know who. For our friend and its life. I could have done 2 or 3 nights on government and politics as an example. How about condense it? We got 12 minutes. Certain other aspects that keep popping up. The critics of government, just several come to mind. We'll get them out of the way so I can think of something new to talk about. Critics of government. Remember, we're using government as an example of the collective mind of man, but ordinary critics of government throughout history and up until this very day speak of government as being this god-awful, out-of-control machinery which must be incessantly fed new amounts of revenue, taxpayers' money, to keep it running. How about a more useful, a wider view? Just what they described. Look at the collective mind of man as this uncontrollable piece of machinery that must be incessantly fed to keep running and is fed by each individual's reaction thereto. Well, for any of you who bristle at the thought of paying your hard-earned shekels to the government, most parts of the civilized world now, anywhere from 30 to 50% of your money goes to the government. Anybody who rails against that and thinks, boy, there's my downfall, if I could just be freed from the lecherous grip of this uncontrollable money-grubbing machine, oh boy. Never mind all that. If you think the bureaucracy, the blind, ignorant bureaucracy, and an insatiable appetite for money of the government is bad for you, a man attempting to be more conscious, again, look at government as an allegory, as an example of the collective mind of man. Look at what people ordinarily think, the collective mind of man. Look at the wisdom of any particular area in any particular place, such as I just made the picture of the concern here in Belgium of the consuming public's uncertainty as to the stability of the prime interest rate. Every time you react to this sort of collective foolishness, collective idea, you are fueling a machine that is insatiable, which is not really the problem, because you need to see that it has never done you any good, which would be even more foolish than I could normally be to ever try and tell an ordinary man that, because an ordinary person would go, wait a minute, you mean everything I ever thought? You're insinuating that everything I've ever thought, life made me think, yeah. And so you're saying that it hadn't done me any good. I go, yeah. And they go, all right, answer me this. If it hadn't been for that, what would I have done? And they got me. But they will never say, okay, if that's true, what can I do about it? For some reason, it never crosses their mind. I repeat, I assume all of you know it is a very workable symbolism, because it's true literally and it's true metaphorically, that any government, of course any organization, but the government is always the largest going, but any organization, once it is being fed by the public, which where it's going to be fed, by its followers, if it was a religion or an invitational organization, but the government's not invitational. The government's in power, and it does not invite you that, hey, since you live here, would you like to contribute? You live here, you contribute. You know, either that or you die, go to jail. So you're going to contribute. And it is an absolute psychological law of physics that once an organization, once a piece of human machinery starts operating, its fuel needs will always increase. It's a matter like of grow or die. But it will always increase. And so in the government sense, anyone's a fool who thinks that the government will ever demand less money. Yeah. I mean, it can go up and down according to elections, but it always increases. It has to. There's no other way out. And so you could say, well, wait a minute, as far as I am a hardworking, middle-class person, I've never taken any kind of benefit willfully. I didn't go out looking for any benefit from the government. I wish the hell they'd leave me alone, because all they do is take all my money and give me nothing. Poor little idiots. That's like everybody hollering, I want political freedom. Well, everybody hollers, I need freedom. I'm being suppressed and held down in some way, except nobody knows how. And so they have to pick out obvious ones, which is the same way that I'm describing now, that people pick on the government and accuse it of being an out-of-control machine with an insatiable appetite for ever-increasing larger sums of public taxation, which is true. That will always be. But that is nothing. That is nothing to a man attempting to be a little more conscious, for a man to individually produce himself. Screw money. That's nothing. You're feeding something else. You're feeding something that keeps you, for instance, that keeps you upset about the government. Just one minor thing. But just to throw it in, since we're using it, if you think, well, I would be better off, I'd feel less stress and probably have less of my arteries clogged up and fewer ulcers if I wasn't so mad about the damn government, all right? That wasn't the reason why I point this out. If you saw the other uncontrollable piece of machinery that you're actually feeding on a non-physical level, and you stopped that or worked on it, struggled against it, you would stop this kind of concern, because it is feeding the ceaselessly hungry and demanding machinery of man's collective mind that keeps a man where he is. And you feed it one way. Well, I gave it to you real simple. By reaction thereto. I could say by input and reaction thereto, but that's to give you a sham sense of authority, like the people do contribute to it. They contribute by reacting to it. They contribute by going, by God, that's true, or else, what kind of crap is that? I never heard such foolishness. It's a machine going, and you just keep shoveling it in. And don't look out there. And you tell that to somebody, and their thoughts go, well, what the hell does this mean? I know you're pointing my head, but what the hell you mean I keep feeding this? I'm not doing anything. I'm trying to discern the truth from folly. Good ideas from bad ideas. 4 minutes. How about, this is all related, by the way. Instead of government, how about something else? Well, I can make it fit. It is an arm of the government, the Department of Meteorology. Have you noticed in your lifetime, and this has nothing to do with weather forecasting, television, or the government still, have you noticed now, in most of your people's lifetime, it's happened again as things do so gradually, but the weathermen, the weather forecasters on television, radio, and in the print, but especially television is where most people see it, they have ceased, just in your lifetime, just the last few years, it happened very gradually, they have ceased apologizing, in the full sense of the word, for their inability, for their blatant, for their continuing failures, that only a few years ago, and it's not complete, but if you'll look and think about, well, most of you already hear me, a few years back, a weather forecaster would make some comment if he predicted, like over the weekend, absolutely it's going to be sunny here in Panama City, no problem, there's not a cloud, it will be sunny, and between the high 80s and the low 90s, Saturday through at least Sunday night. And that's what he gives you on Friday. Saturday and Sunday, it pours buckets. Monday, they would remember, not just the next day, they would do it especially the next day, but weather forecasters for a while. Monday would recall, he'd come back on, and as soon as they would turn it over to him, now to so-and-so, Bill for the weather, and he'd go, well, Fred, I got to tell you, boy, I struck out over the weekend. Well, let me tell you what happened, and they would try to explain. If you notice now, as far as I can tell, weather forecasters now never even mention yesterday's forecast. Never. You know why? They call it only, nobody gives a damn. Nobody cares. Now, right quick. Does anybody still know that I'm talking about the collective thinking, the collective mind of man? I'm not talking about weather forecasting. The collective mind of man, I can stretch this further, since life was the original weather forecaster. That life at one time used to, in certain ways, times past through religious institutions. In a sense, life would periodically sort of apologize to man for what it had done. Not anymore. life discovered what dupes men were. Well, that's a little crude, but not that men don't deserve it. But life discovered that men do not care. That life seemed to have promised through philosophy, through conventional wisdom, that in some area, some civilization, some large group of people or some institution like a religion was led to say and to tell others, well, do so and such will happen to us. And people did it, and no such thing. Yeah. And then just periodically life would send like another vision. And he'd dig up, where's some other old Jewish or Middle Eastern person, some Arab that's out of work, and I'll give him a vision. Where's somebody that can write? And he'd give him a new vision, and the vision would be sort of you understand, apology in the full sense of the word. It would send back an apology to man about, well, all right, I know that you people thought that such and such was going to happen, and I know it didn't work, but look, let me. That's why religions, for instance, keep getting more and more revealed, and new prophets have to come along. That's what it used to be. But it's now reached the point that life caught on that it doesn't have to do that. Since we're talking about weather people, last minute, here's one for you. Probably now is recipient of as much mental abuse as politics, probably nowadays is television. Has any of you considered this? As always, the human mind must localize whatever's going on, must turn it into personal anecdotes. But it must localize something to criticize it. And television now is probably criticized as being the destroyer of the various cultures throughout the world, the dumbing of the minds of children, the proponent, the fertilizer for increased violence. Just television. They're looking at specifics. Have any of you realized, of course we're in the middle of it, I'm having to give you, I don't play prognosticator, but we're in the middle of something happening, and some of you will see it as soon as I say it, you'll realize it. We're in the midst of television having a very salubrious effect in a way that would, well, I'll just tell you what it is right now. The effect of television on the brain waves of men watching it here, India, South America, Iceland, is having a gradual, unifying, homogenizing effect on the brain waves of this whole planet. Regardless of the language being spoken, regardless of whether it's Sesame Street or whether it's a shoot-'em-up cop show, is people sitting there, and for the very thing that is being denounced. Did you realize that the people of this planet are watching now the civilized areas of this world, the Western industrialized countries, that people are watching 7 hours of television? They're sitting there. We say watching it. They're just sitting there. You can't even call them watching it. They're just at 7 hours a day, which is frightening enough. But the developing nations, as soon as some area gets a new Sony plant, and they get first time they've had jobs, what's the first thing they want to do is turn their money back over to Sony and say, give me a TV. And for years they used to sit around. For thousands of years they would sit around campfires and tell interesting stories and the legends of their people. And now all they want is a damn Sony generator, since they don't have electricity, and a TV to hook it up so they can sit there on a log and stare at it. But what's not realized, it is having a unifying effect. You understand me? It is having a homogenizing effect. It is, in a gradual sense, unifying or averaging out, making more similar to one another the various brain waves of the many peoples on this planet. Think about that next time you hear a television attack. Of course, you people now should think something else anytime you hear anything in the world of man attacked. As soon as somebody hollers, oh, look at that. It may at first blush be, oh, but you know damn well by now that there's a lot more to it than that, that's not even close. Unless you call trying to go from Paris to Istanbul, and let's say that you end up, let's say in Vladivostok, and go, damn, I'm going to try and go back. Does anybody catch on? The guys in Vladivostok and stuck and realized, wait a minute, I could have gone the other way. Yeah. I'm playing now a man who has some general notion of geographical distance. And he goes, that's how close you are to the truth when you hear something denounced and you go, my God, they're correct. Okay, I could go, let's see. Go back that way. Or I could. Remember, you heard it said on television.